Now, without any further delay, I would like to turn today's Sybase webcast, What's New with Power Designer version 16, over to your first presenter, Ms. Lori Barker. Lori, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Phil, and welcome everyone. With almost 800 people registered for this webcast, we know that we have struck a chord of high interest, and we're very excited to share the information with you about what's new with Power Designer 16. As Phil said, I'm Lori Barker, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager. I'm just going to take a couple of minutes because I know the reason that we're all here is to hear David and see David's presentation on what's coming with 16. We'd like to show this slide, which is our puzzle diagram, because it shows how, pictorially, how all of the pieces fit together and how Power Designer makes all of those connections. Power Designer is the only modeling and metadata management tool to support data, information, and enterprise architectures. What I'd like to do now is take just a couple of minutes and walk through some of the new packaging offerings that we have with 16. For the Power Designer data modeling market, data architecture market, we are introducing the Data Architect Data Modeling, or DM edition, which is a new twist on an old classic. With this edition, we have rolled back the functionality of the tool to address just the core data modeler needs. This new package delivers everything that a data modeler needs, from requirements management to XML, logical and physical data models, and nothing they don't need, keeping the tool easy and uncomplicated. This product reaffirms our #1 position and is still priced just below our top competitors. The Data Architect RE, or Repository Edition, provides the same features of the DM edition with connections to the repository to support team environments. In our information architecture space, Power Designer Information Architect has been developed to deliver all the key capabilities for organizations looking for solutions to their information problems. This new package combines enterprise modeling techniques like business process modeling and conceptual data models with IT-centric logical and physical data models and unique data movement models. With the addition of the Enterprise Glossary and Web Portal features, which David will demonstrate later, Information Architect does more in one integrated tool than anything in the industry. Moving on to our enterprise architecture offering, Power Designer Enterprise Architect is the renamed version of our Studio Enterprise offering. And this module combines the functionality of Information Architect with EA models to integrate business, application, and technology. With the addition of the Enterprise Glossary and Web Portal features to the Enterprise Architect, all members of the organization can share information using the same language. Power Designer's Enterprise Architect is the only tool that can integrate and transform all the model types needed to completely define and describe the enterprise, thus bridging the gap between business strategy and IT implementation. And now we have a couple of additional options that we have offering in Power Designer 16, which is the Power Designer Portal, and that's a free read-only feature to all repository modules. And the portal ensures all users have a full, thin client access to all authorized metadata, including graphics and full element definitions and descriptions for metadata sharing. This broadens stakeholder communication and involvement. And then lastly, the Power Designer Composer allows users the ability to make edits to certain information directly through the web interface. This is a new and exciting feature for 16. This allows for greater participation among a broader community, fostering more collaborative, a more collaborative atmosphere. Stumbling on my words here. As with all of these releases, upgrade and update paths are available, and we'd like you to speak with your sales rep to understand how you can migrate to the newest Power Designer module to fit your current needs. Now, before we go on, I want to remind you what Phil had told you about the Q&A console, and you can text in your questions throughout the entire presentation. And now let me hand it off to David, the reason why almost 800 of you are here today to learn about what's new in 16 and see how it all fits together. David, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and thank you all for joining today. What I prepared today is a walkthrough of what are the new capabilities of Power Designer 16.0. I'll be touching on some improvements that are in the common area of the tool. These are improvements that everybody will be able to enjoy, regardless of which packaging and which module set that you use or purchase. I'll also talk specifically about some of the improvements that we've made for information architects and enterprise architects. These will be things like the business glossary or some extensions that we've made to our impact analysis capabilities. And then I'll also talk about some of the improvements we've made specifically for the data modeling community, which is where we've grown up from over the years. We also have some new capabilities specific for our Sybase IQ users, and this is a thing called the Reference Architecture Wizard, which I'll show is a great new way of being able to take the ideas of enterprise architecture and bring them into a practical focus when deciding how to implement your Sybase IQ deployments. So to begin with the common improvements, the first thing that we've done with Power Designer 16 and the most visible and impactful change that we've got is the new user interface. This new shell, this new framework for the modeling tool itself, first comes with a new Windows 7 look and feel. So it's modernized to the latest capabilities that modern tools are expected to have. So this is a natural evolution of the ease of use that we've always strived for with Power Designer. But in doing so, we've also added a few capabilities that allow you to get even better use out of the tool, things like the tabbed document interface, which at first seems pretty easy, but when you realize that this thing is enabling you to be able to look at whichever document you want and just quickly pick which one you're looking for, tear them off, put them back, reorder them in any way that you want, and get a better logical flow to your modeling efforts, the ease of use part of that really starts to show. We've also got the new toolboxes that are available in both list form and icon form with auto-hide capability, and that really lets folks really use their screen real estate to the maximum potential, yet also still have the right tools available at the right time. Now, out of box, we've done a pretty good job of putting things where we'd like them to be, but we also recognize that different types of users have different tools and different capabilities they want made apparent. So with the new shell comes this idea of the role-based user interface. When you configure a UI profile, you can select what menus, what toolbars, what toolboxes are visible and available and in what order they're presented in, what tools are presented in each of these to the lowest level of granularity. So what this means is you get to create the UI for your users the way you see them using the tool, the way they personally use the tool, everything you need and nothing you don't, which streamlines the ease of use considerably, especially to some of the non-technical people that the business models and the enterprise architecture models are reaching out to improve our communication and collaboration as a team. So these two new major changes, new shell and role-based configuration, the ability to configure everything from the dialog box to the menus, toolbars, and toolboxes available to you, make sure that you can deliver a user interface that's truly unique for each user. Now, as part of making the product feel and look and behave in a more modern way, new symbols and drawing features are available. 4 key new enhancements here. First is the ability to edit text of attributes and other details within the symbol. So up until Power Designer 15, we've allowed you to create new symbols and change the name on screen, but the sub-objects, the entities of a conceptual attribute or the columns of a physical table or the comment of a process description, none of these things were directly editable through the diagram. You had to go and open a property sheet for that. Now you can edit them directly through the diagram, which again can streamline certain types of changes. You get the change in context and in place, which improves ease of use. To that end, being able to put more things on the symbol. One of the biggest requests we've had and implemented in 15 is the idea of being able to put anything you want, any piece of metadata, in the symbol. But there's 2 limitations that we discovered with that. when you start putting too much in the symbol. The first is improving readability, having everything come as a sort of columnar stack, and that very often symbols are becoming very tall and not very wide. Now that we have horizontal layout, you can add the additional metadata to the left or right of existing metadata, and this allows you to make symbols that are better balanced for the content that they're containing. But the other thing we've done is added the idea of the attribute icon value. So instead of having to put the full text or a full description, you can simply embed an icon related to a value of an attribute and have a graphical annotation. In this particular example, we see here the employee and customer table. This value could indicate a percentage full of the data behind the table, or perhaps a percentage complete of the definition of this table towards its implementation requirement. And these things create a nice visual cue as a common communication among all modelers, what's going on without having to open the symbol and look around or look at more complicated reports. And last but not least, getting lines where you want them and getting complicated relationships or models that have many, many relationships between multiple objects. You know, getting lines that don't intersect is going to become very difficult. And when lines intersect, it became very hard to follow. So the first thing we've got are these automatic bridges that go across the lines. When a line crosses another line, it'll bridge over the line, making it easier to follow. The other is, with automatic routing of the lines, you don't have to worry as much about where the lines are placed. Power Designer is going to take care of that for you, making neater models. So these are all improving readability, all improving ease of use, and bringing models really to the forefront as that communication paradigm that we want with all the folks that are collaborating around what this diagram represents. Now, for architecturally focused individuals, and so we're talking about is information architects and enterprise architects. And by the way, this is available in the Data Modeler Repository Edition as well, because even data modelers will want to have access to the new enterprise glossary. The purpose of the glossary is to give a business term its own representation. It's in the repository. It's a global central resource for all modelers. List of business terms, categories of those terms, and the relationships between those terms. We can define a hierarchy of category. We can define related terms, and we can also define synonyms on any given term. And this allows us to build a single view of the business language. If everyone speaks the same business language as we define data entities, as we define physical tables, as we define business processes, as we define roles and organization units and sites and functions and capabilities, if we define them all off the same core business terms, alignment between these models becomes a lot easier. Ensuring that we're complying to the business goals and strategies become a lot easier because we're all speaking the same language. So it allows us not just to define the business terms and link them to a set of objects. We can have traceability. You know, where is the concept of customer implemented as an entity, as a process, as an address in a physical table, as a this and a that. We can also use it to enforce the naming conventions and provide autocomplete. So if we have a very rich business glossary inside Power Designer at the global level, folks can name things faster and easier and ensure that they're complying to the naming convention. The naming convention will automatically convert the name to code and will also automatically complete the artifacts that we're typing so that we can save time and make sure that we're spelling things right and aligning things correctly. Through the use of autocomplete, we'll also get automatic traceability. But speaking of the repository, one of the other nice new things about version 16 is the repository-based impact analysis. What this does is allows us to really reach beyond the current local workspace to see what is the impact of change across the enterprise, especially when we're starting to deal with multiple model levels of abstraction like conceptual, logical, physical data models, or an enterprise architecture model with our business goals and strategies mapped to functions and capabilities, mapped to organization units that then ultimately get mapped to design artifacts to show our conceptual, logical, and physical implementations of processes, technologies, applications, and of course information. What we're discovering is more and more the interdependencies between what we want to track through impact analysis are not what we see locally as our work, but how this impacts everyone else's work throughout the enterprise. So to do that, when you launch impact analysis, you can then click on a checkbox that cascades the impact analysis algorithms through to the metadata linked directly on the data server of the repository. So this allows us to say, hey, if I'm going to change a business entity, don't just show me what of my logical and physical tables it affects. Show me that it affects anyone else's. Show me if it affects any requirements that have been modeled in the repository, any business processes, any application technologies. Show me if this is impacting those things as well, without having to check out those models, without having to know that those models even existed. We can get a much deeper, richer, and broader impact analysis live against the repository, and that's a huge, huge benefit for folks, especially looking to get that enterprise scope and impact and get that design time change management to really improve and streamline the time and cost associated with change. Now, one of the other things that we've recognized when looking at the repository is being able to share what we've got in the repository with non-modelers has been key. And in version 15, we introduced this thing called the web portal. The web portal is a web-based user interface directly against the repository that allows us to browse and navigate all of the metadata, including the diagrams and all of their details. Browsing is great if you know what you're looking for, but searching is really what people are using this web portal for. And the search in 15 did not have faster and easier ways. You had to configure this kind of query. You had to define this query, and then you could run the query. So unless you're a relatively sophisticated user and can figure this stuff out, it became difficult to really use the repository to find things. So now we've added this thing called Quick Search. What Quick Search does is it lets us look at key metadata, almost like a pre-configured, predefined query, names, codes, or other text string fields, and quickly say, hey, if it's got this name, this code, or this comment, or this text in the comment, let's use that as a quick find. And this allows us to not have to configure or define queries for these simple and most commonly used search criteria. But the other thing we recognize is now with impact analysis running against the repository, there's no reason why that can't be extended to the portal capabilities. So now someone who is looking at the portal not only can use the quick search to find an element of metadata that they're looking for, to find a definition within the repository, to be sure that they understand what's defined there and are using it correctly in their work, or can maybe comment on and say if it's right or wrong. But also say, now that I found the object, what's it linked to? What are all the other things that this thing is connected to in any way? And that's impact analysis. So running impact analysis through the portal extends the search into search with context, which helps people really understand, did I find the right thing? Do I understand it correctly? Do I understand its complete context? And that allows this metadata sharing to carry far more weight and capability. But while we're there, there's also an opportunity for these non-modeling users to collaborate back with the architects. And to do that, the new Portal Composer capability has been added with 16. What this does is this allows you to validate comment, description, annotation, these text fields. Some of these text fields are straight text like comment. We edit them right in the screen. Some of these text fields are RTF, which we actually export to Word and use Word as a local editor for the RTF field to preserve all the formatting and all of the capabilities of the RTF update, and then publish those back into the repository. Anytime we make these changes, when we upload or save these changes, they're checked back into the model. That model is flagged as an update to the modeler, and the modeler can then go and look at and compare old version against new version to see which changes specifically have been made and who they were made by. And this allows us to solicit a richer, more direct feedback from the non-modeler community. So business analysts and data stewards and other folks who may not necessarily need to model directly in Power Designer, or who want to collaborate with folks who are on the line of business and the subject matter expert of non-technical aspects that are being modeled in Power Designer, would use this facility and say, hey, you have access through the repository Portal Composer. Go to the URL and recommend the change. Add an annotation, add a comment, tell us what's going on directly. You don't have to work with us. You can work through these mechanisms. And this allows a 20-to-1, 30-to-1, even 50-to-1 expansion of communication to the end users and those that we're collaborating with to really streamline communication and collaboration beyond the pure modeler community. So those are some great enhancements for architects and enterprises and larger communities. We also still recognize that our roots are in that ability to solve information problems either at an architectural level or at a physical implementation level. So we've also continued to improve the physical data model. And one of the biggest things, of course, we do with that, with each iteration, is make sure that we have the new support for the newest databases, or we've updated support for the existing databases that we support. And that includes the latest in IBM, the latest in Microsoft, the latest in Sybase and in Oracle. And, of course, we're looking at new databases, like now we have full support with NetCisa version 5.0. And that complements our support for specialized warehouse databases, which, of course, also include our own Sybase IQ, as well as our standard databases like Sybase SQL Anywhere, and, of course, Sybase Rep Server. So the capabilities we have are all updated to the latest DBMSs, which continues our mission to provide lossless round-trip engineering on all the databases that we support. So anything that can be modeled or anything that can be represented in the physical database can also be placed in the model. And if it's placed in the model, it can regenerate correctly back out to reconstruct that artifact in the schema of the database. Web services, Java, all these sorts of things, materialized views, are all fully supported and brought up to the latest spec. Now, on the topic of our IQ implementation, one of the other new things that we've added to Power Designer 16 in specific support for Sybase IQ is the ability to use a set of patterns and templates and a wizard that takes sizing estimate parameters and calculates and creates a reference architecture. For this reference architecture, we know what are the servers and server types, and these are fully configurable. So as new servers come out or different hardware is available to you than what we have in the list, you can take and create an additional server parameter or adjust the parameters of an existing server profile and create not just one reference architecture, but you can use the comparison tools to create one that is for optimal speed versus optimal cost versus a balance between speed and cost. And there's a sliding scale on how much you want to balance speed versus cost, and create multiple reference architectures and then use the comparison between them to say, well, this one's cheaper, but it may be slower. This one's faster, but it may be more expensive. This one has more nodes to configure. This one has fewer nodes to configure. And make your right choices from that based on your business needs. So this is a great tool that takes the enterprise architecture model and combines it with a physical data model to give us this architectural physical connection between what should be a physical implementation against what is the conceptual architecture driven by business goals. And that's not all. There's a few other things that we've done in Power Designer 16 that I also want to call out. And again, not least, because depending on who you are and how you're using the tool, these things can make a considerable difference in your modeling efforts. The library models, the ability to create a reusable model, put into the repository, and connected to your models as a library. Changes to the library through the repository are automatically synced to all the models that inherit that library. So it becomes a real reuse that stays in lockstep with the current state of that library as controlled by a governing body or a standards committee or a reference architecture committee. And this allows us really a great way to be able to reuse any model content in any kind of pattern or template. As link and sync technology is really the hallmark of Power Designer's unique differentiator and really the best way for us to be able to connect all of these different models together, we've made two improvements that make it easier for you to understand, manage, and navigate the different ways of connecting these different models together. First is through shortcut improvements, the idea of a full content shortcut. Today, when you create a shortcut, you need to have the target model that holds the actual content of that shortcut open to be able to see the details. What we've done is, in 16, is we actually make a local, sort of a cached copy of the shortcut details. So if the target model is not open, the last known content of that target model will be available to you. The other thing that we've done is we've taken the idea of extended dependency and traceability link, and we've merged them into a single concept of a traceability link. So anything can link to anything else followed by a traceability link, and now traceability links can be typed. So I have this kind of traceability link or that kind of traceability link. It's a dependency kind of link. It's a use kind of link. It's a reference kind of link. And in the dialog that shows these traceability links, you have subtabs that group the different types of traceability links. This gives a much, much easier understanding of what's going on in the dependencies for link and sync. How are these things dependent? How are they connected? Which ones do I care about when I'm looking at this impact analysis? Which ones don't I care about? It really helps us narrow down and focus on what is important given the analysis at any given point in time. Of course, with bringing everything up to the latest specifications, Power Designer is now ready to support all the newer environments. Windows 64-bit environments Power Designer will run successfully in. Eclipse 3.6 is supported. The newest Microsoft Office and Visio, the add-ins that we have for importing from Visio or synchronizing requirements with Microsoft Office or importing from Excel, are all now supporting the latest versions and test against the latest versions of these environments. So really, Power Designer 16 brings the latest and greatest to your modeling efforts. So what I'd like to do is spend the next few minutes actually demonstrating some of these new features in Power Designer. So to do that, I'm going to start a sharing of my desktop. And you folks can expand your view to see the full demonstration that I'm showing here. There is an expanded view button on your broadcast. And what I'd like to start with first is not necessarily Power Designer itself, but I want to show you how you can help yourself learn more about what's new with Power Designer. So here what I've done is I've opened up the Power Designer 16 documentation, which comes with the product. When you install the evaluation product, or when you install 16 from your updates and upgrades for those who are on support in USP, you will have a set of documentation that includes the new feature summary. What we have in the new feature summary is we actually have everything that's been new since 15.0, including the new features with Power Designer 16. This is the book that's going to be most interesting to you right now. And here we break down what are the new core features. And you see there's the new user interface that we talked about, the enterprise glossary, the library models, the role-based. And with any one of these, we also tell you where in the main documentation you can find more. So to find more about how to configure your role-based UI, you go to the Core Features Guide, Administering Power Designer, Customizing the Interface, Controlling Power Designer Interface. And here you can see how you control defaults for menus, toolbars, and toolboxes, the defaults for options and preferences, and then assign them to users and groups and create those profile connections. And so now when I log in as that user with these profiles, I'll get those levels of permissions, those user interface choices, those general preferences. And that helps administrators create the right user experience for the right class of user at the right time. So go ahead and explore the version 16 new features guide, and that'll help you learn more and even remember some of the things that I'm going to demonstrate to you now. But now what I'd like to do is actually go over to Power Designer itself and start showing you some of these new things. So here we have the Power Designer new user interface. So some things are familiar, like the canvas area and the object browser, but some things are going to be different, like the way the toolbars are. So these are, as they've always been, the dockable, resizable toolbars following Windows 7 conventions. But what's new is this, instead of a palette, we have this whole idea of the toolbox. And we can roll up or roll down the various sections here. So I can show or hide free symbol, show or hide predefined symbol. And I can also auto-hide the toolbox so that when I drift over to the right, it pops back. So this way I can maximize my canvas. And let me just pin it in there. So we have the auto-hide, and then I'll pin it back. And so what that does allows you to maximize your canvas, especially on smaller screens like I'm demonstrating with today, yet still have full access to all of these toolbars at the ready. Now I also have two different views. I have this list view, which is very verbose, but really helps us understand exactly what each of these symbols are. But for more advanced users, you have the icon view, which just gives you the icon, but of course micro help is always there. So here's my zoom tool, which I can use to zoom in. Here's my zoom tool, which I can use to zoom out, or lasso select to zoom in, etc. And then here are my creations. Here's my entity to create new entities, and I can stamp out a few new entities and start creating some objects. Now, we also talked about the tabbed user interface. So here I'm showing my main diagram of my conceptual data model, but I also have open my business process model. And so if I click on the tab above, it opens the BPM diagram in the last state that I left it. Or I can go and take a look at my whole architectural framework, which is giving me my list of deliverables for each of the cells, for each of the phases in my framework. But at any time, I can grab and tear the diagram away. And when I do that, the diagram now exists in its own window. And what this allows me to do is actually float the window over a Power Designer. I can resize the window to take advantage of more screen real estate. And if I rip more than one off at a time, I have many more options for being able to really look at more than one diagram simultaneously within my user interface. So now I can look at the main diagram here, the framework there, and I can resize these and anything that I want to do. I can even close the window, or if I want, I can right-click and redock as a tab document, and it comes right back into the tab part of the UI. So this gives us even greater capability for understanding multiple diagrams, that you're not limited by just the canvas space. You can maximize your canvas with the auto hide out of the toolbox. You can rip the windows out of the tab display or put them back however you want to manage them. Now, when it comes to the symbols themselves, we talked about a couple of enhancements. I just want to highlight two main enhancements. One is the ability to go on the symbol itself and edit details of the sub-symbol. So in this case, I want to edit the entity called salary and change it to the word salaries instead. I made the change through the diagram on the sub-symbol. Double-click the object, look at the attributes. Yes, indeed, it did change through the properties as well. This is how we would control the sub-symbol naming directly from the diagram. But the other thing we talked about is the symbol layout. So, for example, if I make these lines cross, by default, Power Designer is still doing what it always did before. Let me zoom in on that intersection here. But what I'd like to do is actually go to Tools, Display Preferences, and show that I now have the option to show bridges at intersections. When I do that, automatically we now have a bridge over the intersection. So now when we see that the lines are crossing, they're actually showing this line goes to items and this line goes to stock clerk, where before we couldn't tell. Perhaps there was just a strange joining of elbows here. But now we can truly tell. The other thing we have is this idea of the auto-routing of the symbols or of the lines as well. So again, I go to Display Preferences. And by the way, this is a choice per diagram. Because it's in Display Preferences, this is going to be something that you would set for each diagram in the tool. Now with auto-link routing, if I create a connection between two symbols, it will automatically link and route the most appropriate way. In this case, it was a direct with a bridge. And this also gives us the idea of being able to have the lines help manage themselves instead of us managing them for you. Now, enough about the common enhancements. By the way, just because I did these things in the conceptual data model, it doesn't mean that you need to be in the CDM to make these changes. Everything that I've shown you, everything that's in Power Designer here, really is about all the models, all the diagrams, and all the diagram types. So everything you see here can apply to whatever model it is that you're using. What I'd like to do now is talk about the glossary itself. So now we're talking about an enterprise global capability managed through the repository. So you see, I do have a repository connection. I am connected to my repository. You can have the glossary exist when you're not connected to the repository, but it doesn't exist for the first time until you've connected. Once you've connected, you have the glossary, and now you can start populating it. We can populate the glossary by creating new terms. The term is a business definition of something. It can have a code, which will help us in naming convention later, and it can have a description. So we define what a business is, and we can also start supplying some synonyms. So a business is also known as an entity or a going concern or some other things. And again, we can have codes for those synonyms because the synonyms can be used as alternates in naming convention. So now we started creating some terms. I can create an additional term. Doesn't really matter what we call it. But then I can also go to related terms and say, well, this next term is related to the business term. And so now I have traceability between this term and the term called business. And of course, with everything in Power Designer, we have full description, full annotation, business rules, We have the dependency tracking, we have the traceability links, and we have the version info, who created it, who modified it, was it derived from something, when was it checked in, when was it checked out. All these things, because they're standard Power Designer objects, are there. Now, this is great when you're creating business terms, but what if you got a list of them already? Well, we also allow you to import them from a number of sources. So I'm going to import them. You can import them from an existing model, so you can pull any list of names from any list of objects in any model and use them as business terms in your glossary. Or you can import from another glossary model. So this is if you have more than one repository and you want to share the glossaries between them, you can. But in this case, I actually want to import from Excel because I have some business terms predefined in an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to go ahead and go look in my documents for the spreadsheet that I built, which is terms here. And this starts the standard Excel import wizard. And this is the same Excel import capability you have from any Excel spreadsheet to any object in any Power Designer model. Now, in this case, because we're going into the glossary, we already know that we're going to import this spreadsheet as glossary terms. So the first thing we're asked is, well, which tab from the Excel spreadsheet do you want to import the terms from? I have only one tab in here, so I'm going to import them all as the business terms. The next thing it does is it looks at every column and says, what do you want this term to be? And so I'm going to take the term and I'm going to make it the name of the term. So everything under the term column of that spreadsheet will be a name of a term. And now I am reading a whole list of business terms from an Excel spreadsheet. This can take a minute or two to perform because there's over 300 glossary terms in that spreadsheet. So basically what we're doing right now is reading our business's terms as defined by the business. Maybe we got them out of some other source. Maybe we exported them to CSV. Maybe we have this Excel spreadsheet we've always maintained as part of our stewardship and governance initiatives. And we can just very easily and quickly bring that into Power Designer. Now, what this is going to give us is a fairly flat representation of this list of business terms. What we'd like to do next is start defining what we call categories. So while this is importing, let me talk to you a little bit about what a category is. A category is a name, like a folder. It's a way of grouping these business terms together under logical criteria. But you can nest these categories together. And what this does is this creates a hierarchy above the business term and allows us to use a kind of business taxonomy to define where these terms fit within our business areas. So we would think of them not so much as subject areas in the classic data modeling sense, because the CDM is going to give us that, but it's more sort of a linguistics, as I said, taxonomy. You know, business terms related to this kind of area, related to this kind of, you know, like financial terms and then a set of terms, process terms and a set of terms. And this allows us a way of starting to get to that context type of metadata that we want to start tracking around our business terms. So it looks like we're almost done here. We just have a few more of these green bars to wait for. And as I said, the nice thing about this capability that I'm showing as well is you could have imported these as a list of data items. You could have imported these as a list of entities. You could have imported them as a list of actors or processes. And these are all ways of being able to get lists of information quickly into Power Designer using the Excel importer. Now, of course, what we'll show as this continues, one of the other things that we're going to show is that these glossary terms are also available through the portal and are editable through the portal composer. So I'll be showing that as soon as the metadata is fully loaded here. Now, one of the other nice things about what you're seeing right here is that this really is indeed and truly a live demo, because when I performed this a few moments ago before running this demo, this actually occurred in about half the time. So I do apologize for the delay, but hey, it's live and demos are like that. All right, so now we've imported 303 and we've updated some of the ones that I started creating. And now here we have a list of our glossary terms directly out of that Excel spreadsheet. And what's interesting is, yeah, you see here we still have our business with its synonyms. And now we can start making relationships between them. But we can also do things like taking accounts payable and making that the code AP. We can start taking things like accounts receivable and making that AR. And I'll explain what that does for us in a moment. We can start adding comments. We can start adding synonyms and related terms. And we can also start adding new categories. So here I can say I have, as I said, one example was to create a category called financial terms. And under financial terms, we may have, one of the things we're going to be doing with financial is we may just be dealing with new category, accounting financial terms versus sales financial terms. And now the easiest way to get one of the terms into the category is simply drag and drop. So here you see now accounts payable, accounts receivable have been dragged and drop in there. So while we're talking about this great new glossary, one of the things we said about this is this gives us an ability to have some traceability. So what I'd like to do is actually show very quickly, if I go to Tools, Model Options, now my whole model, this is an option for the whole model, under Naming Convention, if I enable glossary term for auto-completion and compliance checking, and I go and, in Model Options, also under Naming Convention, enable name-to-code conversions. If I go to create a new entity now, and I want this to be accounts payable, you see I have accounts payable and I can just pick it. And when I pick it, we also have the code coming in from the accounts payable to make that code definition. So now, not only am I getting the name-to-code conversion driven by the naming convention, I'm also getting autocomplete, which allows me to be sure that I'm using the right terms. But now also, if I run the check model, you're going to see a whole bunch of errors now because I have a lot of objects here that are not compliant to the business terms. Let me just undock my results list, and you can see we have these errors. Domain name contains term not in glossary. Business rule contains term not in glossary. And this gives us an ability to check, are we using business terms in everything that we're doing? Are there business terms that we need to discover from our modeling efforts that should be promoted to the glossary? Or are we just using the wrong names, which means that we are not following the governance and standards defined by our business? Data item contains name not in glossary. And that's great. So now we can use the glossary as a true assistance in defining a true data dictionary with a conceptual model and true governance and data standards. So there's a few other things I want to show in the demonstration. I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. And what I want to show now is where the repository has been given some improvements to allow us to really understand the enterprise scope and scale of what we're doing. So the first thing I want to do is come back to, we closed something by accident, no problem. Come back to our conceptual data model. And when we look at our conceptual data model, and right now it's the only thing that's open, none of my other models are open. If I want to make a change to customer, like delete it, for example, right now the impact analysis is only going to show me, well, if you're deleting customer, these attributes will need to be taken into account, these relationships, these identifiers. You know what? I don't care about what's going on in my own model. I want to know how this affects other models, and I don't want to have to check them all out. So all I do in this case is now click on the Use Repository checkbox. Power Designer is now going and examining the entire contents of the repository for traceability links to not just the entity I've selected, but things that it's related to through the repository as it cascades. And we're going 3 levels of analysis deep. So we're going through 3 deep levels of analysis, cascading through all the different artifacts that are related to this entity customer live on the repository right now without checking out any of those models, without having to worry, did we include or consider a model. And so right away I can see, I don't care about the identifiers. I don't care about the relationships. These are things local to the model or the attributes. But what I do see is that I'm generated to a logical entity that's related to a set of physical tables. So this is generated to 4 physical models. It's also linked to a set of architectural models, as it is the data definitions contained within a certain number of database and database instances in our application and technology models. These generated objects may be generated further, so I can cascade out to a class. Here's a C# class implementing customer information that's connected to that SQL Server database. All of these things can be impacted if I change the definition of customer data. And just like any other impact analysis, I can still generate the diagram, and this gives us the full scope and scale of all the conversations we may have to have with other organizations to say, are you ready for a change to the data standard? And it took everything into account, and we didn't have to remember anything. Now, speaking of the repository, I'd like to show some new things that we've done with the portal that also follow this same path. So the first thing we've done with the portal is we've added the ability to do the quick search, and we've added the ability to do the impact analysis. So now the impact analysis, if I take any object like that customer entity and right-click, I can show, or go to it, I can show under the Analysis tab. So I click on the object under the Analysis tab. Here is also a repository-based impact analysis showing all the dependencies and all of the traceabilities that that artifact has with everything else in the enterprise. And I can cascade further down and look at further details and so on. And so again, the repository user has the same navigability and the same visibility to the same set of dependencies as a full client modeler would have. But while I'm here, I may say, well, you know what? I got a problem with what's going on with the definition of asset when I see it in this context. So here I have a comment, a description, an annotation. Now, I'm running the Power Designer portal. It's the same portal everyone gets for free, but what I've done is I've got a license for Portal Composer available to me. Let me just quickly show you where that license is configured. Under Settings, if you go to License, wherever you've installed your floating license server, that host and port will connect you to the license. Once this is configured, all users of the portal will now have the ability to get a Portal Composer license. By the way, for those of you who are in the administration role as well and are worried, oh, geez, what if I want to restrict that to only a certain number of Power users? No problem. There is an options file that comes with the license server where you can include or exclude certain machines or classes of machines so that the Composer license is only available to those whom you want to have that access. But that being said, let's go back and make a change. So now on this artifact, on, let's say, account here, I want to make a change. And I say this is a and of course this is a nice little text editor. It has the spell check and everything like that. And then when I'm ready, I hit save, and you see the repository is now announcing that it is checking this change in. Once the change is checked in, it is now committed to the model. I have a new version, and I have a new notification back. So when I check this model out in a Power Designer license, I can also go and see that this change is there. And if I do a compare between version 2 and version 3, I will see the new comment has been added and by whom, which login has added that in. If I want to edit the rich text field, I can choose the edit, which then launches the RTF editor, which in this case is Word. And this ensures that I don't lose any of the formatting, the fonts, the bullet lists, the bolds, the styles, the colors, everything that a typical RTF field would have. And then if I want to include that back into the repository, it's simply a matter of choosing the file, and it loads in. And when I hit upload, that will ensure that it's published back to the repository in the same way that the save was done, and does a check-in and creates a new version. So the last thing I want to demonstrate is back in Power Designer. I want to demonstrate the reference architecture wizard for Sybase IQ. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is open up a model that is targeting Sybase IQ. I have this simple business warehouse. It's an IQ model, and it has some tables. And let me just make sure that I am set to the latest version of Sybase IQ, 15.2. And a few things I may need to do to the model to prepare it properly. For example, I need to give the reference architecture wizard an idea of how many rows will be in this column, or rows will be in this table. So I'll say 128,000 customers, but we only manage, let's say, 50,000 products. But we're going to have the combination between those two, 1.2 million, something like that, orders to be managed, individual transactions. So now we have some sizing on these tables. What we'd like to do is create a new model. We want to create a model by category and use the template for the Sybase IQ reference architecture. When we do the Sybase IQ reference architecture, we'll get an empty model with tools that allow me to run a certain set of architectures. So the first thing I'll do is launch the Advisor Wizard. And the Advisor Wizard is going to walk me through a new architecture definition. I'm going to say, well, first, what model are we using? Well, I'm going to use that business warehouse. Then it's going to say, okay, given what I've seen from those table sizes, and by the way, if you hit table size, you see those are the sizes I've entered. There's actually a table here I didn't take into account because it wasn't in the diagram. If I want, I can change the row counts right here, and it'll change them in the physical model. I can add ones that I've missed, etc. And it can recalculate. And I want to include growth for, let's say, 2 or 3 years. And now we have the catalog and the data estimates for what's going on. And based on those estimates, I now say what kinds of queries. How many concurrent, really fast queries must I run? How many fast queries? How many normal queries? How many very long queries? And how many very, very long queries? And so this gives me an idea of what kind of workload I'm dealing with. And so based on the workload I want to deal with and the number of queries I need to run simultaneously and the amount of data in the tables and how that is structured, Power Designer is now able to think about what to do. And here's the idea. I want to load 2 tables as critical tables, so now I'm preloading certain tables. How many bulk load rows do I want? All of these things are parameters that help us decide. Do I want to optimize more for cost, or do I want to optimize more for performance, or balance between the two? And what kind of hardware do I have? And you see, these are a set of hardware profiles. Each of these hardware profiles actually comes from a library in Power Designer, and you can add or remove or change these hardware profiles as you see fit. Each of the hardware profiles also includes a cost parameter that can be either preset in the profile or adjusted on the fly. Oops. Clicked on the cancel by mistake. We'll catch up. So, physical model. We want to go for 2 years. We had some numbers here. It doesn't really matter the numbers. We're going to load a couple tables critically. A certain number of rows. And we chose some hardware profiles to consider for the evaluation. And then we hit finish. So now Power Designer is generating based on some algorithms that are part of our standard definition for the best practice for IQ. And we built 3 different profiles, one from each of the different hardware parameters, and what they look like. And you can open any one of these by opening the diagram and looking at the details. So here I have my reader nodes, my writer nodes, my coordinator nodes, the shared disks and the shared networks, and all these other things that are part of this IQ implementation. And within each of these, we have a set of parameters, including number of instances and costs and which servers and which stores are being used. And any one of these, of course, we can navigate and look at different sizes and number of DB files to find and so forth. And this gives us an idea of what kind of architecture we need. So So that's really what's new with Power Designer 16. As we come out of the demonstration, we'll come back to the slides here. And at this point, what I'd like to do is see if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask about Power Designer 16.
So, David, Courtney's been online and answering everybody's questions as it came up, doing a great job handling all that. But I'd like to encourage you, if you have any questions, to take another minute and put them into the Q&A console, and we'll see if we can lob a couple of them out there. We got a couple more. Courtney, you want to read off some questions for us here? Actually, I don't know whether Courtney's in the console. I apologize. Mostly it seems, David, that the questions that we're getting are about the packaging and how it will affect current customers. So I think we've got everything covered. What I'm going to suggest that we do from this point is just close out, and what I'm going to do is share the Q&A with the audience just in case you had a question that you didn't get a chance to get asked, that you will learn from other answers. So at this point, I just want to close out and do our normal follow-up, learn more, do more. So we do realize that what we have shown you is just sort of a tip of the iceberg, and it oftentimes just skims the surface of what Power Designer has to offer for customers. So we encourage you to call your local sales office or call 1-800-8-SciBase and press 1 for the sales option and ask to schedule a customized demo. So what we can do with that is do a lunch and learn with your organization to understand how Power Designer can help your group with your specific needs to change the way you are architecting your enterprise. You also are encouraged to visit scibase.com/PowerDesigner to learn more about Power Designer in general. And for this audience, we have set up a very private evaluation. www.scibase.com/PDEval16 gets you direct to the fully functional enterprise architect that is available for this webcast only. This is not beta, it is the fully functional product, and it's a 15-day eval that you can take a test drive with and see how the new features of Power Designer can help you and your organization. And finally, if you have not registered for our annual user conference in September, TechWave takes place in Las Vegas, beautiful downtown Las Vegas, and 200 technical breakout sessions, including a lot of content on Sybase Power Designer and the new features and functions and how to use it. And so I encourage you to go to our website, www.scibase.com/techwave. And with that, I would like to thank all of you so much for your time today in learning about Power Designer 16, and we look forward to seeing you at the next Blueprint TechCast series. I'm Laurie Barker. On David Dickman's behalf, I'd like to thank you for your time. Take care.